Hi, Right Writers. Thank you so much for joining me today. In this video, we are not going to be writing paragraphs. However, if you are struggling with point of view and specifically shifting point of view is what I like to say, or shifting perspective, this is a video for you. I have uploaded two videos with two different poems to look at how a point of view can change and how writers can alert when the point of view is changing in a different way. And I hope that this video ensures your success in understanding how writers or how poets can again shift their point of view or perspective in different ways. And they use different tools to do that. So that's what this video is about. Again, thank you so much for joining me. Thank you to our writer today, our poet, Margarita Engel. And thank you for her work, Turtle Came to See Me. And thank you to the Poetry Foundation for always posting amazing works and publishing these works online so that we're able to read them and interact with them and use them. So let's take a look. First thing we're going to do, Right Writers, is I am going to read the poem 3 times just to make sure that we get a good grasp of the poem and we are immersed in it for a moment. And then we'll start to break the poem down stanza by stanza, and again, identifying shifting point of view or perspective. So let's go ahead and take it from the top, Right Writers, and I'm going to go ahead and expand this just a little bit so we can see the words, and then we'll start. I'm going to go ahead and take it from the top and start reading. Turtle Came to See Me by Margarita Engel. The first story I ever write is a bright crowned picture of a dancing tree, the branches tossed by island wind. I draw myself standing beside the tree, with a colorful parrot soaring above me, and a magical turtle clasped in my hand, and 2 yellow wings fluttering on the proud shoulders of my ruffled Cuban rumba dancer's fancy dress. In my California kindergarten class, the teacher scolds me. Real trees don't look like that. It's the moment when I first begin to learn that teachers can be wrong. They have never seen the dancing plants of Cuba. All right, taking it from the top, Right Writers, Turtle Came to See Me by Margarita Engel. The first story I ever write is a bright crayon picture of a dancing tree, the branches tossed by island wind. I draw myself standing beside the tree, with a colorful parrot soaring above me, and a magical turtle clasped in my hand, and 2 yellow wings fluttering on the proud shoulders of my ruffled Cuban rumba dancer's fancy dress. In my California kindergarten class, the teacher scolds me. Real trees don't look like that. It's the moment when I first begin to learn that teachers can be wrong. They have never seen the dancing plants of Cuba. All right, third time, Right Writers, Turtle Came to See Me by Margarita Engel. The first story I ever write is a bright crowned picture of a dancing tree, the branches tossed by island wind. I draw myself standing beside the tree, with a colorful parrot soaring above me, and a magical turtle clasped in my hand, and 2 yellow wings fluttering on the proud shoulders of my ruffled Cuban rumba dancer's fancy dress. In my California kindergarten class, the teacher scolds me. Real trees don't look like that. It's the moment when I first begin to learn that teachers can be wrong. They have never seen the dancing plants of Cuba. All right, thank you, Right Writers, for sticking it out with my reading. If you notice, my tone may have changed a little bit. And as the poem became, I became more saturated in the poem as a reader. You can change your voice as you're reading a poem, and the intonation, the cadence, and that may change your experience as you're reading a poem. And that's something else that, I always find is interesting. It's almost like if you were an actor, it would be, how would you perform this? If this was your dialogue, if this was your script, how might you represent this poem on the stage? So just something else to think about, right, writers, as we're looking at a work. And as I move this to 100% right writers, what you're going to notice in this work is that you're going to see she has 5 stanzas in this particular poem. So I want to make sure that I identify that first. So here we have stanza 1, right here. Here we have stanza 2. Here we have stanza 3. Right here, we have stanza 4. And then right here, we have stanza 5. So this poem contains 5 stanzas. So we're going to take it one stanza at a time and identify who is speaking in the poem. Rather than using first person, second person, third person, I want to think about the characters. Who are the characters in this poem? Who's speaking? And then we can always go back to, if you want to then look at first, second, and third person. However, I like to think about it as characters and who's speaking, because again, that gives you more to work with and more to talk about if you were analyzing point of view or perspective in this poem and you were writing a paragraph about it. So let's take it. I'm going to clear this screen and we're going to start with stanza 1. And now I'm going to make this a bit larger so we can see the stanza more clearly. So looking at stanza 1, who's speaking here? The first story I ever write is a bright crowned picture of a dancing tree, the branches tossed by island wind. So for you, if you're explaining to me, well, Cruz, the person who's speaking in this stanza is the poet. It's the poet, and the poet is the narrator. And you know that because you see this very important pronoun, I. The first story I ever write is a bright crowned picture of a dancing tree, the branches tossed by island wind. So you are correct. It is the poet speaking. And in this case, you can also refer to our poet, Margarita Engel, as the narrator. And so if we all agree with that, let's move on to the second stanza of this poem, of this work. Okay, I'm going to clear this screen so I can move down. Now we're in stanza 2 here. And let's determine who is speaking. I draw myself standing beside the tree with a colorful parrot soaring above me and a magical turtle clasped in my hand and 2 yellow wings fluttering on the proud shoulders of my ruffled Cuban rumba dancer's fancy dress. Now, this is all one sentence, right, writers? Notice how the pause does not happen until that period right here. Yes, there are short pauses after these 3 commas here. However, the period does not happen until the end, right there after dress. So if you are with me and you say, well, Cruz, again, the poet is speaking, the narrator. We see I, and we begin to also notice another pronoun, my. So my pops up and I and me. So in this case, you are correct. This is the poet speaking. This is the narrator speaking. And now we're going to take it to stanza 3. And notice how, again, I'm just sort of taking it one stanza at a time to think about who is speaking in this particular poem. Clearing the screen again. Now we go to stanza 3. In my California kindergarten class, the teacher scolds me. Real trees don't look like that. Now it gets interesting. So, writers, take a moment and think about what happened right here in this stanza. Because here we see my and me. But then we also see, I want to clear this screen again because I want you to focus on something that happens here. We see this colon that's happening right there, that colon, and we see all caps, real trees don't look like that. So pause for a minute. I'm going to clear the screen again. Notice the colon. Notice all caps. Real trees don't look like that. And so if you are saying to yourself, okay, Cruz, I understand. This part right here is when the perspective, the point of view changes. The person speaking here in this part is the teacher. And even though Margarita Engel did not use quotation marks, you are still correct. You can argue, well, why didn't she use quotation marks? Well, she did not use quotation marks, but she gave you another hint. That hint was, first of all, she says the teacher scolds me. So we know who's about to speak. Then, rather than giving you quotation marks, the poet gives you the colon and gives you all caps. That lets you know that in that case, that is the teacher speaking. That is another character speaking in the poem. And in this case, this is the poet, or again, the narrator. And so what I love about her poem is that, again, she uses, rather than using the typical quotation marks, opening and closing the quotation, she does something different. She does tell us who's speaking, but she uses a colon to offset the dialogue or the quote that's being said by the teacher, and then even helps us out, the reader out even further by putting it in all caps. And that's what happens in stanza 3. Now I'm going to clear the screen and let's look at stanza 4. It's the moment when I first begin to learn that teachers can be wrong. Taking a moment and looking at this stanza, and if you said or are thinking, well, Cruz, that's the poet in stanza 4, the poet or the narrator speaks right here, you are correct. And now looking at stanza 5, they have never seen the dancing plants of Cuba. And if you are thinking again for stanza 5, that the poet or the narrator is speaking, you are absolutely correct. The poet or the narrator is speaking in stanza 5. Now let's look at it as a whole. And so identifying again that point of view, that perspective, and looking at the entire work. So I'm going to clear the screen, right, writers? And I'm going to shrink this so we can see this again. as a whole work and start to, see it together. And I'm sorry that I have to make this really small, but it's part of the effort is so that we can really see the changing perspectives here. All right, so moving down, now we're just looking at the poem itself. So I'm going to keep my blue with the poet, the narrator speaking in this case. So blue, all this part right here, blue in this case representing the poet. And again, I know it's the poet because immediately in stanza 1, the poet begins with I and then switches again to I, me, and my, letting me know this is first person perspective here, point of view. And in this case, though, the narrator is speaking. The poet is speaking. Keep in mind that, right, writers, that the narrator is not always the poet. So be very careful of that, of just thinking that the poet is always the narrator. That is not always true. And now this part, real trees don't look like that. That, in this case, this part of the poem is where the teacher speaks. And you could argue that the all caps represents the teacher yelling and scolding that child, the kindergartner, the poet, the narrator in this case. And so I really hope, right, writers, that this ensures your success with point of view and that you understand that there are different ways that writers can present point of view or perspective. And in this case, our poem today, our poet, Margarita Engel, Turtle Came to See Me, the perspective, the point of view is not through quotation marks, but actually through the use of a colon and through the use of all caps to represent that someone else is speaking in the poem. Thank you so much, Right Writers, for watching this video. Take care, Right Writers. Love you guys. Bye-bye.